As the year is winding down, I wanted to look back at Wuthering Waves and think about what my experience was like throughout the 1.x set of versions. And tell you what, there's been something living rent-free in the back of my mind. God, 1.1 is a better introduction to Wuthering Waves than 1.0. Yeah, I'm pretty sure for most people 1.0 is kind of a low bar, but that's as a version. What I'm talking about is specifically what 1.1 managed to do as an intro versus what 1.0 did as an intro. So much so that I wish they swapped 1.1 and 1.0 sequentially. So let's have a little fun and end the year by talking about why I think Wuthering Waves version 1.1 would serve as a better 1.0 and why I feel it was the real beginning of Wuthering Waves. So this is what I've been picturing in my mind. Imagine this. When you start the game, you have this whole sequence with a goddess that looks like Lucia from PGR, and then you get thrown into the water. Next thing you know, you were picked up by some mysterious woman who has this air of knowing more than she's letting off, and then this boat sequence ensues. After that, the camera pans up to the sky above Mount Firmament and then cue the Wuthering Waves title. This scene kept replaying in my mind over and over again. It immediately set the tone, along with the mysterious yet tension-filled vibe, coupled with the calming humming from Changli. It would have been an immaculate experience. That's not to say 1.0 is terrible by comparison. In fact, 1.0's intro is pretty standard. Same cutscene with totally not Lucia, wake up in front of boring beret and character no one uses, having a staring contest with a statue, and immediately get thrown into a boss fight. It might be standard and somewhat cliche, but hey, it gets the job done. But when it came to introducing the world, answering the questions of where am I going, what is this place about, and why am I here, I think 1.1 did a better job conveying that feel of the world, hinting at the world's mechanics and building a mystery. At the same time, there was the constant buildup of that tension that was introduced from the second you see that boat ride. And all of it is due to their effective and very efficient use of show don't tell. You see, after you land, you'll be faced with a puzzle that has some time mechanics already hinting at a theme that would encompass the island, which then would lead up to the temporal barrier, which throws you into a cutscene that I would consider to be the most magical experience that I haven't felt in this game ever. This cutscene shows you a beautiful vista of the snowy island that is contrasted by the disaster of the temporal disruption, which was set off in part by the Fraxidus, and is accompanied by the soft melodic tune of the Mount Firmament theme that adds to the feeling of beauty in the midst of peril. This is the best form of show don't tell Kuro has ever executed in the game. Immediately you're introduced to the snowy landscape, you're introduced to the problem set before you, and you know the villains who are responsible for this disaster, which was already set up before you crossed the barrier because you ran into them before you got there, but you get the idea. World building? Check. Setting up the lore through a mystery? Check. Setting up the conflict? Check. In this small sequence, 1.1 managed to do so many things all at once without dropping the vibe that brought you here. If anything, it enhanced the vibe further as you progress through the journey. Put that against what we got in 1.0, where right after the Crownless fight, you get stuck into a yap fest where 3 individuals are having a conversation concerning the situation. Okay, maybe I'm being a little harsh here. 1.1 has a bit of yapping, though it's pretty short with some very pertinent information. When comparing these two openings, you will find that both serve different purposes. 1.1 was there to highlight the new land you stepped into, and 1.0 was there to highlight the enigma that is Rover, and explaining echoes. Though, it's really strange where after the intense fighting and the big suck, we go right into a scene that looks like a casual meetup, and everyone's just chilling. And look, I'm all for light moments here and there. It's nice to cut the tension every now and then, but I don't think they cooked long enough with the initial tension. Now, you can argue that the crownless fight was that entire tension build, and sure, I can see where you're coming from. But these people literally picked up a random stranger who has some mysterious origins, along with weird stuff happening around them. If anything, they should be hightailing it to the nearest city to figure out what's going on. And if anything needs an explanation, just explain it when it happens along the way. Small explanations like what TDs or echoes are work. So at what point do I think they would have cooked long enough so that they can have that tension breaking moment? Well, to me, I would say it's when we get closer or get into the city, where we need to talk about it, don't we? Wuthering Waves is a sci-fi game. We need to accept that there's going to be a lot of technobabble to get through to describe the mechanics of the world. That said, this kind of technobabble needs to be introduced in a manner that doesn't overwhelm the player. One thing to keep in mind is that the story is not entitled to your attention. At any moment, a player can check out for any reason, and it's on the story to ensure that this doesn't happen. Suffice as to say, oh god. Get me out of here. When we get to the Mortefi section, I never expected an entire encyclopedia of Wuthering Waves to be thrown at me. Wave-worn phenomena, remnant energy, overclocking. Wait, is this going to be on the test? Do I also need to know about the children's epidemic from 2 decades ago? This is just information overload. Yes, in isolation, every single piece of information is important to the world and has a significance in later parts of the story. Sometimes way later. If you think about it, timely information doesn't seem to be a thing for Wuthering Waves. You keep mentioning the Tethys system like 5 times now and no one explained what it is.
As for the Tethys system, imagine it as a supercomputer. The Black Shores relies on its calculations to observe, forewarn, and solve anything Lament related.
Thank you, Alto. It took like 20 minutes to get an explanation. But that's the issue. Tell me what I need to know when I need it. The lore of the world is important. It helps support the mechanics that make the world what it is. But that is not the story. The story is something that is being told on top of the foundation of the lore. And when it comes to storytelling, lore should be separate from the story. The only times when lore can be dropped into the story is when it's immediately important or appropriate for the situation. If not, it's extra information we could do without. It simply turns into, cool story, bro. I don't need a lore dump. This is not a history class. Stop giving me history classes because what you're doing is putting the story to a screeching halt because you want to set up 15 stories ahead of what's in front of you. I know this section has been highlighted to be the worst part of Wuthering Waves by many other people, but it's a good example of what not to do in the middle of a story. Not to mention, it's still in the game, so new players will have to experience the same deal, which sucks. And you know what hurts? This whole scavenger hunt deal was ultimately pointless because it was meant to mislead ill-intentioned individuals. It was, at that moment, I felt like I wasted my time over nothing. Talk about a slap in the face. Yes, I hear you. Good thing we have the skip button, and I am right here with you. But here's the thing. Falling back to the skip button does not change the fact that a section is bad. You're simply ignoring it and pretending that everything is good. At the end of the day, if a restaurant is selling shit and you go there and choose not to order it, it doesn't change the fact that the restaurant is still selling shit. So I don't want to hear people look at pretty cutscenes while skipping the painful parts and say that the story is the greatest story that has ever storied, because that's not true. Okay, that was a bit of a rant about people using the skip button as some sort of defense mechanism. Let's not delve into that topic, and instead let's talk about what was done right in 1.1. In 1.1, every single concept that was introduced in the story was directly tied to the story itself. Not to mention, the concepts were introduced in a timely manner where they fed you bits of information in a piecemeal fashion, allowing you to digest information one at a time, which will lead up to the full picture. Everything from the second Resonance Awakening state to who the Sentinel is and what the temporal mandate is, all of it was told in a way that was easily digestible. And every single concept had its place in the immediate story. We even got Jinxi's backstory, and it comes with an awesome cutscene. Remember after the Crownless fight where we had that casual conversation with some people we just met? Well, in that conversation, we also got an exposition about Jinxi's background. Yeah, back then, we didn't need to know that much about her at the time. Just say she's a very young leader of Jinzhou and be done with it. But in 1.1, the whole backstory is welcome information. Tell me what I need when I need it. And you know what? It did the job. And so much more. After completing 1.1's story, the air of mystery still remains despite you getting the answers you needed for the immediate story. What did the Fraxitus want with the second Resonance Awakening? Who is Rover? What are the Sentinels really? There's even the setup for the Black Shores. For the case of 1.1, there's a lot of focus when it comes to its storytelling, and while maintaining that focus, they're still able to drop bits and pieces of clues that branch out into other areas of lore. That's right, what they're dropping are hints for future stories, not explanations. In a sci-fi world where there's a lot of complex ideas floating about, it's best to take the time and lay out the information that allows us to digest the information that they want us to learn about. If not, it's inevitable for us to forget some pieces of information, or worse yet, check out completely. If anything, we could be conditioned to treat certain pieces of dialogue as white noise and tune it out. The funny thing is, it kind of happened to me. I didn't know that the wave-worn phenomena known as the retroact rain was introduced in the Mortefi section. It didn't even hit me that the retroact rain was a wave-worn phenomena. I actually thought it was introduced in the latter half of 1.0 with Alto. And mind you, the retroact rain is one of my favorite concepts in 1.0. Watching Gion lose his shit is quite engaging. But that's the thing. Tell me what I need when I need it. With the way the story was told in 1.1, the intrigue kept building with the mechanics the game was trying to explain to you in a well-paced manner. If the game started with 1.1, by the end of the story, you'd be locked in while holding the knowledge of some of the mechanics of the world, and you'd be ready to move on to the next story where it's time to learn about the retroact rain, the lament, and the Thronodian. But there's one small problem. Aside from the story, there's something else that worries me surrounding 1.0. When Kuro said they scrapped 90% of their story and had to rebuild from the ground up alongside asset changes and a revamped world, I was so down for that. But at the same time, I was a bit worried. You see, back in PGR, they made a really dark post-apocalyptic story, and they did a fantastic job in crafting a dreadful and dark world where everything was so messed up beyond repair. But at the same time, managed to romanticize the dread that was present amidst the destruction. This was their wheelhouse. A lot of us PGR players would love to see that world brought to life in an open world space, but alas, apparently people didn't like the depressing and oppressive world that Wuthering Waves originally had. But honestly, the problem isn't a depressing and oppressive world. I think the real problem comes from the cold and sterile design of the world. Besides, if a depressing and oppressive world is a problem, then I'd be shocked to see Elden Ring winning Game of the Year in 2022. Not to mention, if that's a problem, people must really hate the Dark Souls series. Hell, I guess people don't like Nier Automata. A part of me wants to say that it's the Genshin players' fault with their sunshine and roses looking world, but that's all speculation. And honestly, who's at fault doesn't matter, as there's nothing we can do now. What's done is done. That's not to say they shouldn't rework their game. As I said earlier, the problem is with the cold and sterile design of the world brought out by the watered down and muted color palette. Oh yeah, also the character designs desperately needed a rework, so I'm glad they did what they did. But it's worrying nevertheless. On one end, it's a testament that Kuro listened and decided to pull a really ballsy move. On the other end, it looks like Kuro didn't have enough faith in their original vision to begin with. And it's scary to think about a developer who has a vision but is afraid to go through with it. Again, speculation. But I can't stop thinking about it. Looking back to PGR, it was inspired by Nier Automata, but it started off real generic, and everyone knew something had to change. But instead of completely shifting moods, they decided to double down and improve on the dark post-apocalyptic genre, which then forged their own identity. That said, what's the deal with Kuro's other game? In the base area of Wuthering Waves, it feels like they were waffling between identities, touching on themes but never going deep into them. We get areas that come off as post-apocalyptic, but not too apocalyptic. Then there's others that look war-torn, but not that much torn. Then there's others that's filled with life, but at the same time, it feels abandoned and devoid of life. It's okay if Wuthering Waves isn't some sort of dark post-apocalyptic world. It could be a brighter world where nature is reclaiming its land from a bygone advanced civilization, but none of the areas really dive deeper than what it is. Worse yet, throughout 1.0, with the mix mash of themes all over Huanglong, I couldn't put my finger over what Wuba was supposed to be. A bit of an aside, I don't think Wuthering Waves now is supposed to be a post-apocalyptic world or a war-torn setting, despite some of the original designs left behind taking on that theme. I think it's supposed to be a reclamation effort to push forward against a lament into the frontier. After all, Jinzhou is the most recent city established on the border of Huanglong, and it looks like it's a foothold that shields against the tacit discords. I think that's what it is, at least that's all I can infer. I'm not sure, I'm no lore master, but I feel like whatever it's supposed to be, I don't think it was properly conveyed. Anyway, moving on to 1.1, it's an entirely different story. They dug deep into their themes. I'm pretty sure Kuro were aware of the mediocrity of the base area and had to change things. It was almost as if the game was completely transformed to a point where you would think you're playing an entirely different game. Clearly, they've improved, and you can tell just by hearing a simple melody. Back in 1.0, I recall a friend of mine describing the music to be more ambient than music, and I can't help but agree. Now, it was that surreal moment where I could have swore that Kuro tapped into our conversation and decided to change things with the music, making it feel more melodic. But it wasn't just that. Mount Firmament was full of identity that stretched beyond its music. Clear landmarks like the dragon-shaped mountain or the circular structures that tower over the landscape, the fauna trapped in multiple instances of time, the snow frozen in place as if the world itself was holding its breath. The attention to detail in every aspect of Mount Firmament was filled with so much intention, along with the improvement of the usage of their heavier color palette. This is perfection. When I think back to what I experienced in 1.0 as the start of the game, I remember thinking how aimless the world felt. If I didn't know anything and went through 1.0 as a new player, and someone told me that Kuro had to scrap 90% of their story and the game was heavily impacted by it, I would say, yeah, I can see that. But the thing is, that's not a compliment. I get it, I'm beating a dead horse. I'm sure everyone and their mom has been on the same page as I am with 1.0. But the reason why it's worth talking about is because as much as Rinescita is around the corner and it looks amazing, new players will have to experience the 1.0 experience before they get to the 2.0 stuff. It's why it's living rent-free in my mind that if we started the game with 1.1, it'd be a different story. I even imagined how the story would be structured by adding elements of 1.0 after 1.1 to make the story more cohesive leading into 1.3. Like, after you finish the conflict in 1.1, Jue would tell you that your next step in your journey is in the Black Shores, and then Jue will end the arc by saying this.
The wuthering waves ebb and flow. They shall send you back to where you belong.
It said the thing! It said the thing! Afterwards, Jue would then take you and Jinshi to Jinzhou. You then explore and learn a bit about the city while trying to find any clues about the Black Shores. Then you run into Scar, leading him to be jailed. Then you get more clues about the Black Shores. Then you meet up with the Black Shores. Then boom, Retroact Rain appears, and it sets off the latter half of 1.0. Something along those lines. That would make Mount Firmament look like Tutorial Island, and when we're done with our business here, boom, off we go to the world of Wuthering Waves. I'd go into more detail about this, but at the end of the day, telling you about my ideal story isn't going to change much. Or could it? A few weeks ago, I started Zenless Zone Zero because I learned that Miyabi was around the corner. I'm a simple weeb. I see girl with katana, I'm sold. Like and subscribe if you too are motivated. If you aren't, like and subscribe anyway. Anyway, let me tell you, I had a harrowing experience playing ZZZ getting from level 1 to 36. The reason being, the TV sections. let me just preface with this. I do like the concept of the TV section. I think it's a novel and creative idea. What I do not like is that the TV section is so prevalent, it encompasses everything in terms of story and exploration. So much so that I felt like I did more TV stuff than actual combat. In fact, the combat sequences are usually less than a couple minutes, while it takes like 10 minutes to deal with the whole TV thing. I thought I was going to be playing an action combat game, not some strange top-down exploration game. What was the point of me rolling for characters if I'm not going to be using them 80% of the time? It was until I hit 36 where everything changed. There were less to no TV sections, and the rest were all linear exploration combat zones. And I did indeed get to engage with the combat system more than I did before. But let me tell you, going from 1 to 36 takes a long time. During my journey from 1 to 36, there were multiple instances where I wanted to quit. The only reason why I didn't is because Miyabi was at the end of the road. But now that I got through all that nonsense and I got Miyabi, and I'm honestly looking forward to no one in the future, the journey from 1 to 36 was such a stain on my experience, I still had that feeling where I wanted to quit. That said, with the Miyabi patch out, Hoyo did change some things about ZZZ, one of them being that they made the TV sections optional for the early sections of the game and created a new experience for new players to substitute it, which is commendable, and it proves that changes can be done. If Wuthering Waves were to undergo something as dramatic as changing their beginning, that'd be wild. And hey, if they scrap 90% of their story due to feedback, anything's possible, right? Well, at the end of the day, it's just wishful thinking. After all, changing something like the beginning of Wuthering Waves, which is already live, would honestly be a bigger undertaking compared to scrapping 90% of their story pre-launch. But here's something I want to drive home. I operate under the belief that the introduction to any game should reflect and build up towards what the game is and what it will be, whether it be the setting or game mechanics. Much like how PGR has evolved over the years, as gratifying as it is to watch them change for the better, I genuinely think that they should redesign their older missions as they are outdated. For instance, in the fight where you first encounter Alpha, have the player take control of Alpha instead of Lucia to tease the potential of where they could take the 3-ping warp system. Hell, even the old hidden content with Roland could use a facelift. Just replace what they have with the actual Roland uniframe so it feels less clunky. As for this, well, I'm not sure what to do here. Are we cooked? But even so, what's important for me is that the beginning of the game should reflect what the overall game will be, exhibiting the potential of its systems, whether it be through combat or story. Much like any introduction IRL, always put your best foot forward. To me, Wuthering Waves version 1.1 was that best foot forward. And not only did it set the bar for patches to come, it set the expectations of what the future patches would look like. And by using that expectation, they could give us an experience that exceeds those expectations or subvert them. Now, the original concept for this video was to compare 1.1 against 1.3 and 1.4, but then this video would be over an hour long, and the videos I made for 1.3 and 1.4 are still kind of fresh. Let me just say that they have their own issues, so do watch those videos if you care to know why I feel 1.1 stands on top among the 1.x patches. But really, I wanted to make a fun thought piece about why I think 1.1 would serve as a better intro to Wuthering Waves over 1.0, where I'm sure I'm probably someone who stands in the minority with this thought, but even so, it'd be fun to entertain an idea like this. Because I wanted to feel that same magic that I had felt when playing 1.1. 1.3 and 1.4 didn't do it for me. Not that those patches were bad, but to me they pale in comparison to what 1.1 achieved. If you disagree with me, that's fine. Do tell in the comments because it's fun to see what everyone else thinks. Also, I am well aware that Kuro are making some small tweaks to 1.0. That said, I can't stress enough that the start of the game is important for new players. And with new gacha games coming over the horizon, Wuwa is going to have a tougher competition moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, now that 2.0 is right around the corner, It's time for Kuro to start over again and bring about a new beginning. This looks to be a new take on Wuthering Waves, and I'm glad they didn't forget that they could write their villains. It's funny because one of the best highlights of 1.0 was the Scar section. A reminder that Kuro can write amazing villains just like for what they did in PGR. As promising as 2.0 looks, remember what it took to get us there. I know Kuro gets a lot of praise, and deservedly so, but at the same time, I do want to take a step back and say, hold up, there's still more work to be done. I'm not always going to agree with all of their decisions, nor am I going to defend them the whole way through, as they aren't always perfect. But I will recognize their effort to respond to the feedback of their players, because to them, that's what matters most. But yeah, I'm excited for what's to come for Wuthering Waves, and all I can do is hope that 2.0 will be their biggest success yet. So let's look forward to the new year. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and a big thank you to all my subscribers for your support this year. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!